Hi everyone, it's Sandy, and today I am doing the mid-year book freakout tag, which was created by Chammy, whose channel name is just Chammy, and Ellie from Earl Grey Books. I will leave links to both of their channels in the description box below. This is actually my fourth mid-year book freakout tag, so I did start this tag when it came out in 2016, I believe. Then I did 2017, 2018, and this is my 2019 mid-year book freakout tag. I will leave a link to all those previous videos in the description box below, so feel free to go ahead and check them out. So far this year, I have read 34 books, and I felt like I have a pretty good reading year. A lot of the books that I've read are books that I really enjoyed, which leads into the first question, which is the best book you've read so far this year. And because I've read a lot of really great books, it's really hard to choose the best book, but a recent book that I finished that definitely is one of my favorites is I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. This is a debut novel that follows our main character Ben, who recently comes out as non-binary, and as a result, their parents end up kicking them out of their house. Ben ends up contacting their sister, who they haven't even seen in over a decade. Ben ends up moving in with their sister, and they end up transferring to a new school as well, where they meet this boy named Nathan. I do want to give trigger warnings for this book for misgendering, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and parental abandonment. Since this is an own voices novel, the representation is amazing. Ben does begin going to therapy, and they also begin taking medication, and I just really love seeing the positive portrayal of going to therapy and taking medication. Also, one of my favorite things in the book is Ben's relationship with Nathan. They just have really great chemistry together, and I was rooting for them from the very beginning. This was the first book that I finished in July, so I hope to talk more about it in my July wrap-up, so stay tuned for that. The next question is the best sequel you've read so far this year, and without a doubt, that would be Arch Enemies by Marissa Meyer. This is the second book in the Renegades trilogy. This was the very first book that I finished in 2019, and it automatically became a favorite. I felt like I haven't read that many series this year. If I have, they're typically first books in a series rather than continuing with the second, third, fourth, whatever book in the series. Anyways, the whole Renegades trilogy has to do with characters with power and secret identities, and it's just so amazing. In case you don't know what Renegades is about, it follows our main character Nova, whose family was killed when she was very young, and the world that she lives in is divided by renegades and anarchists. Renegades are known as the good guys, there's the superheroes, and when this whole incident with her family was happening, she believed that the renegades would come and help save her and her family, but they never showed up, and as a result, she holds this grudge against the renegades, and she wants to get revenge by taking down the entirety of all renegades and their whole system. Nova does have powers, so what she does is she ends up posing as a renegade in order to infiltrate their headquarters, but as she's doing this, she meets this boy named Adrian, who is the son of two renegades council members. Adrian also has his own secrets, and the story goes from there. This was just such a great sequel. I read through it so quickly. This is a type of book where you pick up intending to only read a few chapters, but then you end up reading more than half of the book in just one sitting. So if you have not read Renegades, I would highly recommend it, especially if you love a slow-burning romance and a story that involves characters with powers. The next question is a new release you haven't read yet but want to. So for this question, my answer would definitely be Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. This book came out at the end of June, and it's a fantasy romance set in modern-day Seoul. It follows an 18-year-old main character who is a gomiho, and I apologize if I'm saying that word wrong, but she is basically a nine-tailed fox who devours the energy of men in order to survive. That sentence from the synopsis alone has me immediately wanting to pick up the book. So back to the synopsis, the main character, Mi Young, ends up crossing paths with a human boy, and she witnesses him being attacked by a goblin from the forest. She ends up intervening to save the boy, which violates her rules of survival, and as a result of her saving him, he finds out that she is a gumiho. I've heard so many amazing things about this book, and I definitely want to pick it up. So the fourth question is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I will be mentioning two different books, and the first one is Supernova by Marissa Meyer. This is the third and final book in the Renegades trilogy. You all heard me raving about the sequel earlier in this video, so obviously Supernova is one of my most anticipated for the rest of the year. Also, I love the fact that this book is called Supernova because the main character's name is Nova, and I'm just so excited to see where the story goes and how it's wrapped up, because the way things ended in the previous book had me screaming. It was just so intense, and I need to know what happens next. Another answer that I have for this question is Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Tomi Adeyemi. This is the second book to Children of Blood and Bone, which was actually supposed to come out earlier this year, but then it got pushed back to the end of 2019. Children of Blood and Bone was definitely one of my favorite books that I read when it first came out, so I'm definitely looking forward to reading the sequel. I do think I have to do a reread of the first book before I continue the sequel, because it has been a while since I first read the first book due to it being pushed back. The next question is the biggest disappointment, and that would definitely be Defy Me by Tahira Mafi. I did talk about it in my June wrap-up, so I won't go too in detail about why I didn't like this book, but this is the fifth 5th book in the Shatter Me series, and I just didn't like the way the story was formatted and the inclusion of flashbacks. I did listen to the audiobook version of this, so when we would have the flashbacks, it wasn't super clear that it was a flashback, whereas if you read the physical book, all the flashbacks are italicized, so you can easily distinguish the difference in timeline. But with the audiobook, it's definitely a lot more confusing, and overall I felt like not a lot happened in this book in general, so unfortunately I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. The 6th question is the biggest surprise, and that would definitely be Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. So my first Christina Lauren book was Autobiography, which I read earlier this year. So Autobiography was an okay book for me. It wasn't my favorite book. I gave it like a 3 out of 5 stars. I had some issues with it, which I won't get into because that's not the point of this question. But because I gave Autobiography a 3 out of 5 stars, I wasn't expecting that much when I went into Josh and Hazel, but I ended up really enjoying it. So Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating is an adult romance following 2 main characters, Josh and Hazel. They both knew each other when they were in college, but they weren't like super close friends or anything. They were just kind of acquaintances. Josh was actually Hazel's TA, and they did have some weird and awkward encounters throughout college, but overall they weren't close at all. So the story takes place 10 years later, and Josh and Hazel encounter each other again, and they begin developing this really cute friendship. And for fun, they begin setting each other up on blind dates, and they would go on double dates together. I really love the characters in this book. They were really fun to read about. Hazel is kind of a quirky character, but I really loved how she embraces who she is and she's not afraid to be herself. Josh is also Korean American, but he's such a sweet, precious cinnamon roll, and I loved him so much. I just really love seeing Josh and Hazel interact, and I love seeing their friendship develop into a romance. So this ended up being a big surprise to me because I didn't expect to love it as much as I do. The 7th question is favorite new author, and that would definitely be Elizabeth Acevedo, who wrote The Poet X and With the Fire on High. I've only read The Poet X, but I definitely have her 2nd book on my TBR. The Poet X is a story that's written in verse, and I don't read a lot of poetry. I haven't read a story written in verse since I read Crank back in high school. I really love The Poet X. It's an amazing story that explores family, identity, and religion, and so I definitely look forward to reading more books from this author. The next question is favorite new crush, and I'm actually going to change this question to favorite new ship, and that would definitely be Tori and Olivia from Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This is a story that I read last month, and I really loved it, and it's really terrifying because it's sci-fi and horror. So at the beginning of the book, we are given this backstory about this crew of scientists and actors that set sail to film a mockumentary on mermaids, but eventually this ship lost communication and was found 6 weeks later completely abandoned and with no bodies recovered. So the story takes place 7 years later. A new crew has been assembled, and they are determined to find the answers of what really happened back in 2015. So I definitely ship Tori and Olivia. Tori is a bisexual marine biologist who specializes in sonar, and then Olivia is a lesbian and she's a media personality, so she basically reports and gives updates on the research that is happening. I really enjoyed seeing their interactions, and the story really does not focus on romance whatsoever. The author just teases you a little bit with it, but I definitely look forward to reading the sequel because I believe the author is going to develop this romance more, and I look forward to that. The next question is newest favorite character, and I would have to go with Ren from Girls of Paper and Fire. Ren is the love interest, and I just really loved her character and hearing about her backstory. When she's first introduced, she's a pretty mysterious character, but eventually you grow to really love her. She's such a strong and fierce person, and I really love seeing how much she cared for the main character Lei, and I also definitely look forward to seeing more of that in the sequel. The next question is a book that made you cry. I feel like I don't cry a lot when I read books, definitely not as much as I do when I'm watching a TV show or a movie, but a book I recently read where I did tear up was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I'm sure most people already know what the story is about because so many people have read it and have been talking about it. I did also finish this book last month, so it's pretty fresh in my head, and it follows our main character Alex, who is the first son to the first female president. Alex is also bisexual, and he's half Mexican, half white. At the beginning of the story, he attends this royal wedding, and he ends up getting into this disaster with his nemesis, Prince Henry, and as a result, he and Henry are forced to fake a bromance. However, once they begin getting to know each other, they also begin falling for each other. So without going into spoilers, there are a few scenes towards the end where I started to tear up, and tears were definitely shed, but I do love how overall this book leaves you feeling very hopeful, and I would definitely recommend it. Next is a book that made you happy, and and I would definitely go with Fake It Till You Break It by Jen P. Wing. So this is a story that follows Mia and Jake, who have known each other since they were kids. Their moms are best friends. However, they don't really like each other and they can't stand to be together. Lately, both of their moms have constantly been pushing the idea of them dating one another. So in order to get their moms off their backs, they hatched up this plan to pretend that they're dating and then break up after a couple of weeks. So this book does have the fake dating trope, and I just loved seeing how that played out. I love Mia and Jake. Mia's also Vietnamese American, and I do want to mention that this isn't a story of Mia being Vietnamese. It's a story of her falling in love. It has nothing to do with her being Vietnamese. She just happens to be Vietnamese, and that's the story. And seeing Mia and Jake's relationship develop just made me super happy. So if you have not read this book, definitely check it out, especially if you're in the mood for a summer contemporary. The next question is your favorite book to film adaptation that you saw this year, and I haven't seen any book to movie adaptations this year. I just don't go to the theater very often, so I just haven't gone around to seeing any book to movie adaptations. I did really want to see The Sun Is Also a Star, but it came out around the time where I was about to head out for Book Expo and BookCon, and then by the time I got back, it was like not in theaters anymore, so that was really sad. So next question is your favorite video that you filmed this year, and that would definitely be the makeup book tag that I filmed with my parabatai Trin from Transformers. I will leave a link to that video down below, but it's basically a video where I did the makeup book tag, but instead of putting up makeup on myself, Trin was doing my makeup and I was just answering the questions. I just had so much fun doing it, especially since I was with Trin, and I just love how that video turned out, so if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. So the second to last question is the most beautiful book that you've bought so far this year, and I haven't been buying that many books lately, but one that I bought that I really love is a repeat answer, but that is Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Ngung. I don't have much to say about this, but I love the colors on this cover. I just love purple. It's my favorite color, and I love this cover so much. It's so beautiful. And the last question is, what book do you need to read by the end of the year? And I would definitely have to go with All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is a book that I've had on my TBR for like 2 years, maybe even more than that. This is a historical fiction book that takes place during World War II, and it follows a main character who's blind. That's all I know about the story, but the main reason I haven't picked this book up yet is that it's historical fiction, and I don't read a lot of historical fiction. That's just not a genre that I read a lot from. I really have to be in a certain mood to read historical fiction, and I just really have not been in that mood. But I've heard so many great things about this book that I continue to keep it on my shelves, and I just haven't unhauled it yet, even though I've had it on my shelves for a couple years. This is a book that I really hope that I could actually get to before the year ends. So that is it for the mid-year book freakout tag. So in the comments, please let me know what is one of your favorite books that you've read so far this year. I know it's a hard question, but that's why I phrased it, one of your favorite books. So you don't have to pick your top choice, you could just pick one of them. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye!